Probably the challenge I had myself in preparing for this evening was almost honing in on what I felt were the key issues of the day, because I think that in itself, as Hugh's touched on, one of the challenges we've got around not just transport in our own roles as for those of us who are in the transport industry, just as individuals, is how we adapt to the changing world out there, how we fit travel into our lifestyles, and indeed how our lifestyles are changing, and the role of transport and travel in enabling that. So there's a couple of points I just wanted to share. We've got, in my view, we are in the midst of a transformational change in personal mobility. I've put "and goods" in brackets. So the way in which goods are moved around our cities in the future is going to be changing. But the focus for my statement is very much on personal mobility. And the kind of question I keep coming back to in my own mind is it something that we want to wait and be subjected to in terms of the changes that are happening around us, whether it's Uber or Google and so forth, or do we want to get on the front foot and start to influence the way in which our cities develop over a period of time, working as closely with those that I've just mentioned to ensure that happens in the the way that suits us all. I'm going to just flick over these those couple of slides. There are only two things. This is my provocative statement. I think there's only two things that matter right now in terms of transport and travel and what this looks like in the future. One is the debate around vehicle private transport ownership as versus private transport usership, and I'll come back to this and what I mean by that in a second. And the second point, as Hugh's touched on, is the fact that vehicle technology is changing. We're in the midst of change in vehicle technologies, and it's the debate around how and when and if, in some people's minds, autonomous vehicles will become an everyday part of our lives. So in terms of the usership versus ownership discussion, why I think that's important, I'm being stage managed, is just some stats really, just to say why it's important. In the younger demographic, almost universally within developed countries, driving license ownership, for want of a better word, is on the decline. So just some numbers there. We've got in the US, 16 to 20-year-old age group, over the last 20 years or so, or longer, the number of the proportion of that section of the population who have a driving license is dropping off the scale, without wanting to get too sensational about it. So there's a reduction there. Similarly, in the UK, more so in the last few years, the proportion of the younger population who actually have a driving license is reducing quite significantly. So why is that? And it's important for us as we think about the future and what the plans look like. There's basically the convenience factor. People just, the younger population, too busy doing other stuff now. Don't have time to go through the process of learning how to drive. It's a long-winded process. It's expensive, and so forth. And sometimes, I guess, one's parents are becoming less interested in teaching their younger folk how to drive, whereas that's the cheaper option. The vehicles themselves have been, and still are, I guess, many expensive to own. So why would I want a driving license? And the third point, which I think is the point I'll come back to, is that I can share my transport with other people, whether that's mum and dad taking me somewhere, or actually my mates, or indeed, as we'll come back to in a second, Uber. There's now a service, a facility where I can actually use other people's transport. I don't need my own, so why do I need a license? Taking that on, again, in the younger demographic, there's an increasing penchant for the share economy. Airbnb is another great example in a different sector that, when you've got an asset, then from a purely financial point of view, it makes sense to many to share that, the use of that, and there's no reason why, and as we're seeing, that transport isn't continuing in that vein. And Uber, I don't want to signal Uber out specifically, but the principle of shared access to vehicles, a vehicle arriving when you need it, the convenience associated with that, a type of vehicle that suits your needs is very attractive, and particularly fits very much in the younger demographics kind of lifestyle choices that they're now making. The final point on this slide, just a show of hands, who is familiar with the term mobility as a service? Okay. Mobility as a service is really something that's taken off particularly in Finland, where a company called Mass Global are establishing themselves. But this is very much about being able to use your smartphone to book whatever sort of transport you need, whether it's public transport, a cab, or even access to a pool bike or a bike share service at the touch of a button, and you're matched with the type of transport that suits your needs. And it's very much about flexibility, adaptability, and the transport suits the individual's requirements, rather than necessarily being as fixed a system as traditionally been the case. And then final slide, a couple of slides from me before I finish off, is around the discussion around automated vehicles and self-driving vehicles. Who would think that, or who believes that autonomous vehicles are a thing of fiction, will never come to fruition? Somebody's got their hands up. Who believes they're with us already? Okay. So part of the challenge we have at the moment is that to a certain extent, both sides of that argument are true. I think depending on where you are in the world, depending on whoever it is you ask, driverless vehicles are with us to a certain extent. The ability for cars to park themselves, assisted parking, is now becoming increasingly commonplace. But then equally, the kind of prospect of cars that will just drive themselves across an entire city is a thing that Back to the Future or something of that nature is kind of speculating about. And this slide, which I won't dwell upon really, but it's just to make the point that the challenge that we face, kind of either as professions or as a society, is that across the globe there are different views as to the uptake and how quickly autonomous vehicles will become, or self-driving vehicles will become, kind of commonplace. The kind of key headlines over there on the right-hand side there, that fully autonomous vehicles are and could be available in the UK within the next 10 years. Whether they're adopted and commonplace is another matter, but in terms of the technology, that's a possible scenario. The stat that isn't on there actually is that in some countries, particularly in the Middle East and Dubai, that they're actually making some very bold assertions that they wish for, I think it's 35% of all vehicles on the road by 2030 to be fully autonomous. And that's their stated aim as a municipality, and the read down from that is, and they then want to put the conditions in place to enable that to become true, I guess. So just some finishing points, I think, from me is that I won't dwell on each of these. The point about having the list of points here is that these are all, to a certain extent, questions. Will the advent of autonomous vehicles and shared use of transport lead to changing urban patterns? And if so, how so? Will they lead to a decrease in traffic? Will the shared ownership model lead to a decrease in traffic, or through making travel by vehicle more convenient, increase the amount of traffic and congestion on our roads? At a very practical level, with autonomous vehicles, a real opportunity. Vehicles will know where they are, they'll know where they need to go to. So street clutter around signage could potentially become a thing of the past, as vehicles will know intuitively where they need to get to, and the street signs are there for us dummy humans, after all, in order for us to know where we're going. And in doing so, to lead to a kind of more attractive public realm. The bullet there, 3 up from the bottom, with shared ownership and the fact that vehicles could, in theory, in the future, be moving around the system themselves, is parking going to be required? Do we need to be able to position our vehicle directly outside our place of work if, in fact, that vehicle is then going to be going somewhere else to transport somebody else to a different place of work? So are we looking more at cities and areas where folk can be easily dropped off or picked up, as versus where I can choose to park my vehicle? And the final point that I wanted to finish on is that, taking Hugh's point, there's a bit of a cop-out in many ways, that actually that there are a number of questions here that right now we can't answer. I have a view on professionally what I think the answers to these things are, but what we need to be able to do in terms of how future cities are planned, or parts of cities are planned, is ensure that there's some future-proofing and thought leadership, I guess, on ensuring that at worst we don't make decisions about how cities develop that prevent different decisions being made in the future, so that we keep some flexibility and adaptability in how cities are planned and how decisions are made. And sorry, Hugh, to blow time, but the key thing for me, just a thought to keep with you as you go through this evening, is all those questions and the answer to those questions could be left to chance to evolve, or they could be managed through vision, as I said, suggested in the case of the Dubai municipality, by making a very bold statement and assertion and having a vision about how you want your city to be. But who is it that takes some leadership in that kind of visionary approach?